Hello everyone, welcome back to the car. I just wanted to tell a quick story today about a conversation I had a few years ago with a young lady who was heavily pregnant at the time. She's now the mother of a wonderful son who I've met a number of times. I had just had my first child and she was about to enter motherhood for the first time, so even though we didn't know each other very well, we were just having a light chat about what it was like. And while we were chatting, she outlined the circumstances leading up to this pregnancy and let me know that it was an accidental pregnancy. It was kind of no way of hiding it. But because I'd seen the couple together, the father and the mother, they seemed like such a really happy, cohesive pair that I felt bold enough to ask if they were going to get married. And she said no, and it was kind of an awkward moment, and I regretted asking it, to be honest, because it did seem like overly bold at the time. But I guess they seemed so happy together that I just assumed that they were, even if they didn't have a wedding planned, that they must be engaged or that they must have talked about it. The way that she responded made it sound like they hadn't even, it was something they didn't even plan to do ever. And I felt sort of embarrassed for having asked that question and sort of spoiling the fun, exciting conversation we were having about babies. But now thinking about it, I do feel a little bit sad. I think it's a pretty common experience for pregnant women, and certainly for me when I was pregnant, to feel very emotionally vulnerable and very kind of needy almost, for especially for the man in your life, or the father of the child in most cases. And thinking back on it, I feel bad for her finding herself in this somewhat precarious situation with with this new relationship and this the father of her child, and there not being that stability, not even the promise of a marriage to kind of make the situation more stable and reliable. And these days it's becoming more and more common. I don't quite know the statistic off the top of my head. I think it's somewhere between a third and half of first births in this country are now being born outside of wedlock. And that doesn't mean that the parents don't eventually get married, which sometimes they do. That statistic doesn't cover how many couples are engaged or effectively engaged at the point of the birth. These days, weddings are such extravagant events that people will often put off getting married just so they can have the kind of wedding that they want. But some large, I expect, chunk of that statistic is made up of these pregnant women who are, they know the father of the child, they know who it is, they have some kind of relationship with him, and yet they don't have that stability to rely on. They're not married, they don't have a wedding planned, and they don't even have an engagement or the promise of an engagement. And I don't know if the regard for marriage among the youth of this country is so low that they're not even bothered by that. Like, they don't even, their regard for marriage is so low because they've seen a lot of divorces, or because they've seen many happy relationships outside of marriages. They don't even mind not being married. They don't even really see the utility of it. It's possible that this young woman I was talking to is just as happy with the situation with the father of her baby, with her partner, to use a neologism. I really don't know how much I'm projecting my own insecurities onto her, but maybe she felt perfectly secure without the legal and the symbolic framework of an engagement or a marriage. On Women's Hour last Friday, we reviewed a book called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, which goes over many, many consequences of the sexual revolution and the differences in trends about sex and pregnancy, childbirth, marriage, divorce, all of these things that have all changed radically in the last 60 years. But there's one nuance that I didn't get to talk about in that discussion that I really wanted to make known, which is that I do believe in marriage and in family and having children, and I think that the very best situation to raise children in is a marriage. That is, that's not just my opinion, it's also supported by a lot of research. And of course there are exceptions to this rule. There are married people who abuse their children and live in awful situations, and there are unmarried people who are wonderful parents who raise very well-adjusted and happy children. But the pattern is, and my opinion is, that children are best raised inside a marriage, and that is best for the father, the mother, and for the children. It's good all round. But that doesn't mean we have to present the situation as a dichotomy between two people remaining chaste until marriage and having their first sexual experiences with each other within a marriage and having children that way. And then on the other extreme, the situation of that many ladies find themselves in these days of having children of men, possibly not even knowing who the father is. There's a large spectrum between those two things. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect young men to propose to the women who they accidentally impregnate. Even if that proposal doesn't turn into a marriage before the birth of the baby, I think there's a huge benefit to the mother emotionally and to the and that security that the mother feels will be felt by the entire family. I think often in this conversation that nuance is lost, and people think back to pre-sexual revolution and into antiquity, thinking that all children were conceived within marriage. And it's true that the rates of children born out of wedlock was much, much lower, but I think a lot of those births were I don't know the exact statistics, but it seems that a lot of births happened less than 9 months after the parents were married, in a rather hasty ceremony. And of course this may have caused a scandal especially in high society, but as long as the couple were married before the baby was born, or even shortly after, it was somewhat, the situation was somewhat remedied. These days the idea of telling young people to refrain from sex until they are fully married is considered extremely old-fashioned and unrealistic. And in a situation where most people aren't religious these days in this country, I think that probably is an unrealistic expectation to have. But I don't think it's unreasonable to expect unwanted pregnancies to result in a marriage. And that is something that I would like to see encouraged by parents who are trying to guide their children through the modern world. I'd like to see parents encouraging their sons to propose if they do accidentally impregnate a girl, and to encourage their daughters to only have sex with the men who they could at least conceive of being married to, even if they're not yet at the place where they'd like to get married to them. Is it so unreasonable to expect women to, at least if they're not saving themselves for marriage, to at least save themselves for a man who is halfway marriage material? I don't think that's too much to expect, but it's an odd world that we live in, and I guess I'll just leave it there for today. So do tune in to Women's Hour on Fridays at 9 p.m. And until next time, I will see you again soon. Have a good day.